off to bed now.
Let's talk about the African movie rocking the internet right now, titled Can You See Us? This movie is actually directed by Kenny Mumba, and this is actually the first Zambian film to make it onto our glorious platform, Netflix. Now let's set the parameters for this review. This is actually going to be a non-spoiler review, so if you intend to watch this as a substitute to the full film, I'm sorry, because that is not what this whole review is about. What this review is actually a technical review talking about the story, the cinematography, the sound, and every component about the movie. With all this out of the way, let's get into this film. The first thing this film actually taught me was that a film made based on a changed story can actually be a very nice film. Most movies that are usually crafted around true stories or made to just educate the people are just taken for granted. They go out and they just shoot it virtually anyhow they want it, but this was well executed. This is because the main subject that this film is actually about is about albinism. And if you go to places like Zambia, kidnapping albinos and selling them and using them for money rituals and a lot of things is very prevalent in those countries. Hence, this film was actually made to address those topics. And despite the fact that it was meant for education, it was also made in a very entertaining way. So that takes me to the first part of it, which is the cinematography. I think this movie actually shines in terms of cinematography. Just look at the walls and you can tell that people have been living here for so many years. The cracks on the walls and the textures, even if they had created all these places to actually shoot this movie, they executed this very well because all the textures around look very used and do not look like they just went out and had plenty money to just build the sets and start using. So that is the first thing that stood out to me the most. The next thing about the cinematography that stood out to me the most was also the color palette. Oh my goodness. In a long time, this is the first time I've seen very efficient use of color in any African movie. Just look at the colors here. In fact, they use the traditional teal and orange, and that kind of color theme runs through the whole movie, from the lighting and everything. You constantly look at the fact that they usually have one color at the other side and also have the other color at the opposite side. And they stay true to this color scheme right from beginning to the end. The other thing that did so well about the cinematography of this film is the nature of the diffuse light. Hardly do you get very hard light sources. If you look at the lighting on these two kids walking right here, you can see how diffuse the light is. Usually this is achieved by putting some kind of white material above the characters as they are walking, or if you're shooting in broad daylight, it's a way of kind of like dissipating the light so that nothing is hitting the subject directly as hard light. And that was how they treated almost all their daylight shoots, and I was really so impressed with that. Beyond that, one of the things that got me clapping for this movie producers was the nature of the highlights of this film. If you look over here, just look at the edges of these characters. They don't look sharp, they don't have that kind of digital look, even though this is actually shot on digital. The technical name for this is halation. You can see this kind of halo effects around the characters, and it just makes it look so nice. Even if they are shooting a subject directly towards a window or a very white background or maybe a very hard light source, the edges around the character always have this kind of dreamy look, and that just makes the image so aesthetically pleasing to look at. The other thing they efficiently used here was the issue of bokeh. Now, I spoke about this during the Jagun Jagun review, where you realize that they usually blur the background, just as you are seeing right now what I'm doing with this talking head. As you can see, the background is blurred. This is achieved by using a very special lens, which I'm also using here, which has a very high t-stop, or in photography you say f-stop, but it still means the same thing. So that is another thing that stood out to me the most in this particular movie. Now, still on that same cinematography, they used lots of close-ups. And for me, it kind of like helped to tell the main story because it's a very emotional story. And if you study film, close-ups are supposed to bring you closer to the characters for you to be able to feel their emotions. And since the movie is about bringing out emotions, the director, in collaboration with the DP, decided that they will go more with the close-ups so that we will constantly be close to the characters to actually feel what they are feeling. Hence, in a way, if you watch this movie, it's really actually a teardropper. Halfway into this movie, you would really cry. And that takes me to the other component, that this movie actually invokes or possesses that universal quality. What do I mean by universal quality? Everybody across the world, even if you are not an albino or whatsoever, you would realize that there's some components in that movie because at one point in your life, you've gone through some form of rejection or something else. You might find a semblance of it in one of those characters in the movie, especially the lead character. The other thing about the cinematography is also the handheld feel. Mostly, if you have the camera shaking in this particular way, it makes the scene feel so much alive, and it makes the audience feel like they are there and witnessing whatever that is going on. And one thing is that these shakes you see here are really organic. There's a difference between micro jitters. Let's say if you're using a very light camera like the camera I'm shooting on right now, which is the Panasonic G7, if you put on a lens that does not have any stabilization, you have this kind of micro jitters happening. And that kind of shake is different from the shake that you are witnessing in this particular movie, which is mostly obtained by either mounting the camera on an easy rig or probably just rigging the camera so that it's much more heavy. When the camera is heavy, you tend to get much more authentic handheld feel than using a very light camera in my particular example. So kudos to the director of photography for deciding on this handheld feel, because it just gave the whole movie some kind of very surreal feel. Now, that is not to say that every part of the movie actually had this kind of handheld feel going on, and that is what made it so unique, because they knew how to balance between having very stable shots and also having handheld shots. And that for me was really fascinating, because it really showed that the director of photography knew exactly what he or she was about. These days, when someone has a drone, they just shoot a bunch of drone shots and they just drop them in the movie just like that. And I really like the way the drone shots were actually distributed throughout the whole film. The other thing they did so well here is the practical lighting, or also using the motivated lighting approach. If you look at all the lighting in the movie, you realize that when there is a hard window here, or when there's a window here where light is supposed to come from, you see that all the major lights are always coming from that side. And most of the times, if you see a lamp in the background, most lights will also come from that particular direction. And I felt like the use of practicals in this movie was really used in such a way that I was really impressed, because constantly the lights were not just coming from random places, they were always motivated by a light, a lamp, or something in the background. I also think they did very well with the issues of sound effects and the Foleys, especially in this very first scene. Take a listen. You can hear the footsteps, you can hear the ambience of the fact that these people are in the market, you can hear the bell of the bicycle, and you can hear people talking in the background. This for me means that they really paid a lot of attention to the production. Again, I must also give a special mention to the top-down shots in the movie, because I felt like those shots were mostly usually very well composed. Now, the introduction of the Madman, I felt like that part was actually genius. If you look at the nature of the angles over here, we just see the hand touching the boy, and the other angle we see is an over-the-shoulder shot looking down onto the boy. Again, the power dynamics play here means that the boy is very vulnerable, so they still use the cinematography to help tell the story. And I felt like this was genius, because right from that point in time, they do not even show us the man's face until they cut to the room, where for the first time we get to see the face of the madman. And I feel like this was really well done, because it kept the anticipation going and we really wanted to see who this madman was. Still on the cinematography, there were instances where they actually broke the 180-degree rule, and if you don't know what that is, mostly if you pick a line like this, all the shots that are supposed to come are supposed to be on this particular side of the line. The psychology here is that if the character is on the screen left and this one is on the screen right, at every point in time, they must maintain that same screen direction. When you break it, the opposite is true. The person suddenly jumps to the other side of the screen. And if you look at this scene, that is exactly what they do here. However, when I analyze it carefully, I realized that this was done for aesthetic reasons, because the main intent of the scene is to show how disoriented, or at that point of the story, the center could no longer hold. Everything was beginning to fall apart. They decided to break this rule to make it feel like everything was also falling apart. And that is one thing about filmmaking. Remember that when we say rule, it does not necessarily mean a rule. You can learn it, and once you know the ins and outs of it, you can choose to break it for aesthetic reasons. So kudos to them once again for choosing to break certain rules at certain points in time. Beyond the 180, they also broke the rule of thirds in most of the scenes just for aesthetic reasons. For example, this scene right here. And if you don't know what that particular rule is, when you see these particular lines on the screen, the rule says that you are supposed to place your object of interest in any intersecting part of these lines. So if the person is looking screen right, you're supposed to give more space to the right to accommodate where the person is looking. But if you see here, the opposite is actually true. The person is actually looking from this side of the screen to this way, and instead of giving more space there, they rather choose to give space to the opposite side. And again, this is for aesthetic reasons. I'm sure they did this to really help push out the emotions in the scene, which in this case, things were not going on well. And so once again, they decided to use the cinematography to help tell the story in this particular regard. acting in this movie, as usual, was really top-notch, and I really like how they all rendered their characters. Now, special mention must be given to the child albino. Oh my goodness, he killed the role, or maybe let me reveal a secret. She killed a role. My colleague Alice Johnson, who actually runs the channel AJ Tube, you can find the link in the description below. This is her channel right there. She actually interviewed this director, and this is what he had to say about that particular character.
Most challenging part was finding the right cast. When we started casting, we're looking for a 10-year-old or 8-year-old little boy born with albinism. We searched everywhere. We couldn't find someone who had the same style or who could actually pull off the script the way we were actually looking for. I was skeptical because I was like, okay, but the role we're looking for is for boys, so why bring in a girl? But we're like, okay, let's try it out. Let's do the auditions. My producer asked Yasmin Doria. She asked if Tawo, that's the girl's name, if she would actually be open to play a boy. That's the little boy you see in the film.
So there you go. The boy was actually a girl. And when I was watching it with my brother OBL, together we noticed this thing, but we couldn't just put our finger on it. There was something so strange about the boy. Apparently, it was a girl that was made up as a boy, but that is not relevant because at the end of the day, the child really played the role very well. As a matter of fact, all of us really commended the child for the role that he played. Props must be given to the senior albino who actually played the grown-up role of the little girl. But hey, he actually did well, but I would dare say that the child, he or she, how should we even call it, played the role very well. The other good thing in this movie is actually the music. Now, I'm not by any way a professional musician or know the beats, but I just know what sounds right and what sounds good. The songs in this film are really so good and they are really catchy.
The days I hurt the most when I'm uncomfortable.
And if the producers are watching this video, I'll just encourage them that they should do well to put out the songs, because everywhere on the internet, almost everybody who has watched this movie are asking for the songs. The songs are really top notch. So kudos to them for all the music. Now, talking about music, the sound score for the film, I felt like was really very good.
Nobody is born with hate, but it is taught.
And once again, I doff my hat to all the producers for all the great works that they really kept into this film. The other special mention here is about the makeup. I don't know whether they even use makeup at all, but even if they did, that even makes the makeup person a genius because that was so minimally done. You could see the pores in the skins and everything was natural. It's unlike most African films where somebody sleeps and wakes up and already the person has makeup on, or maybe in the middle of the night the person is sleeping and they have makeup on. You can tell that the skin of these characters are so naturally treated. And like I said, I do not have an idea if they really had makeup on them or not. If they had, that was really efficient use of makeup. Still on the issue of the makeup, if you look at the hair of the characters, I really like the way they managed to make them look natural. I don't know whether the characters were made to grow this hair or their natural hair was actually complemented with some other artificial hair. Regardless, the hair was also very well done because it managed to look so natural and looked really belonging to the characters. I must also give special mention to the editing of this film. I kind of like the pacing a lot of the cuts and especially the reaction shots in the movie. They were really very well executed, and kudos to the editor because, trust me, without the right pacing in the edits, this movie would not have felt exactly as it feels when you watch it.
Chama.
The silent moments and the time frames being given for reactions, or maybe choosing to show a reaction instead of the person speaking, those choices really made a huge world of a difference in the way the audience consumed the final product. The only thing that I really got wrong during the middle of this film was the introduction of this Sharon character. When the guy came in, she actually wrote her name on this particular sheet and kept it on the table. And the first thing I thought was that this girl is going to be deaf. But I had it all wrong because all of a sudden I realized that Sharon could talk. So that was a little bit of a letdown for me because I really thought that they wanted to build on the fact that Sharon also had some form of disability coming to meet with this guy with this whole albinism thing. At this point, I am going to get brutally honest honest about the other sides of this film. So if you have your emotions invested in this film, I'll just suggest that this is the right time to click off this video. I'm warning you, if you want to proceed, let's go ahead. But just remember that I warned you. With all the beautiful things that I said about this film, unfortunately, one side that it falls short is the plot. Believe it or not, there are some key things that this movie missed that it hurt me so much, because I would have really loved this film to actually be almost a flawless film. Now, why do I say this? This character right here, his parents die in the movie, and till the end of the movie, we don't get to see anything. We are forced to just believe that they died, and we must accept it. But we were not shown it in any shape or form. It was just kind of reported, and this reminded me of like Greek tragedy. And for me, that was a major letdown. I feel like they should have really taken their time to really fill in those gaps. As a matter of fact, I kept convincing myself that at one point we were going to have a flashback showing all those particular things, but hell no, the movie ended without that showing. The other thing is that on this same plot, there's another part where this child goes through a struggling process. Again, they just jump and show us the child growing up and assume that we should fill in the gap. At a certain point, I felt like they'll show us the struggles that the boy went through in the house in the hands of the father's wife. But hell no, once again, the producers or story writers thought that we should just fill in the gaps. And for me, I felt like these were very huge letdowns, because those were opportunities to just make this film almost flawless. So, in as much as I praise them for the fact that they really did a lot of motivated lighting, part of it also became parts of it Achilles' heel. Now, what do I mean? If you look at the African setting, most of the times when you walk into people's living room, hardly would you see them placing, let's say, a lamp just like this. I'm sure this was just done for aesthetic purposes, but it doesn't truly represent what we do have here in Africa. And for me, it's just kind of like trying to make something look cinematically accurate, but not necessarily naturally accurate. That is what is happening in this particular scenario. The other thing is that in as much as I also praise them for the way they introduced the Madman into the film, once again, the issue of the Madman and whatever he represents, I think was very underrepresented in this film. The art form of cinema is all about showing but not telling. Again, everything about this Madman was simply reported to us. We never saw him in action, trying to kill someone or throwing anyone. Even if it was a lie, we didn't see him trying to portray any of those characters. That would initially give us also a bad impression of him. Then maybe later on, the impression is recorrected. Everything is simply just told to us, and we are simply just forced to believe that that is how it should be. At this point in time, it is clear that all the major problems with this film are with the plot and not the cinematography. The cinematography for me is really so much well done, but everything I talk about here is specifically about the plot. And still talking about the plot, these boys here who try to capture the albino to cut off the leg to use it for money rituals and whatever that they wanted, if you look at that story, it just again left hanging. We are not really shown what happened to them afterwards. They just disappear from the story. We don't know whether they were captured, sent to the police station. I think there was just one line later on that seemed to suggest that the boys will rot in jail.
And that guy, I really hope he rots in jail.
So we are made to assume that that means that they were captured. But once again, assumptions, which I think is not really appropriate. They could have still tightened up those loopholes so that those things become much more clear and not letting us just speculate what happened to certain people in the movie. The other major letdown for me in this movie was the language. This movie was actually shot in English. Now, this has always been a debate even in the academic community, the use of language in art. I felt like shooting this movie in Swahili or any other local language that is spoken in Zambia would have really made the acting great and not make it too cringy. Now, why do I say this? I can feel that actors were trying to deliver lines in English. If you look at the child character, the one playing the albino, you can tell that because they are children and they are taught English language at a much more quicker rate in today's world, the language kind of felt more natural with the kid than the adults. You could tell that the adults were really reciting lines. Cinema transcends the language barrier. For example, where I grew up, we sometimes used to watch Chinese movies without the benefit of subtitle, and we used to even understand them. But even in this case, because he had the ability to do all that and even still accompany it with English subtitle. And for me, it was a little bit of a letdown. Like I said, that is just a personal opinion. This is always a well-debated topic across. When someone is finding it difficult to express something in English, I ask them to say it in their local language, and immediately they say it in their local language, you can feel the natural accent that is invoked. Then I tell them, okay, take note of what just happened and repeat it in English. So for me, it's an experiment that I've done on a couple of occasions because of my theater background, and I know for sure that when you are dealing with communities who do not have English as their mother tongue, you are bound to run into challenges with your acting because people are trying to remember lines so that they can sound grammatically right and authentic. All in all, I was really impressed for this movie because I took interest and began to look up to see whether the director had a whole body of works, only to realize that this guy was already into the shooting of video commercials for TV stations and all that. And so you could tell a little bit of that from the nature of the way the film was actually made. As a matter of fact, the cinematography is so good that at some points in time, the movie actually feels like an artistic film because everything is so well done, from the compositions to the set design and everything, the lighting, the color palette, everything works in tandem to kind of make you get that kind of intended emotion that the director actually wanted. Fun fact, the director is actually a halfway self-taught filmmaker. He learned a lot from online, and for me, that is a very motivating thing that somebody of that stature has made a film that has made it all the way to Netflix. And so for me, the director's story is really a very motivating one for independent filmmakers all across Africa. Knowing very well that coming by money or getting funding for projects is really extremely difficult in our parts of the world. Kudos to this director, and the producer of this film is actually the wife of the director. And once again, it still boils down to the fact that collaboration is very important. And in our part of the world, that is the way to go. So always collaborate with people, come up with good ideas, and get out there and tell that story. You may never know where that movie or where that story is going to take you. And as usual, please make sure to go watch it on Netflix so that it will add up to the rating, because you'll be contributing to the African movie industry. We need producers to keep making great films like this to put Africa on the filmmaking map. Make sure to avoid the temptations of downloading this from pirated site and head straight to Netflix and watch it. If you are new here or if you're seeing my face for the very first time, welcome. This is African Amaze channel. Over here, I do talk about cinematography, photography, editing, and all its related branches. I also watch movies and talk about other movie industries all across the globe. If all this sounds interesting, I would do much appreciate it if you do click on the subscribe button. Please make sure to do turn on the post notification bell so you are notified anytime I drop awesome content like this right here from the continent of Africa. Click here to watch Alice Johnson's interview with the director. That's the full version, and I'll definitely catch you in the next one. Until next time, as always, guys, keep practicing filmmaking. Peace out. So once I was talking, I remembered that thing I wanted, and I've forgotten again. Jesus, I should bring this behind scene. Okay, yes, I have it. Language for the negative, so I've forgotten. I'm trying to bring it. That's why I said the video will be a little bit chaotic. I managed to remember everything. Okay, let me talk about this positive. I remembered something.